I'm 28 years old, and I've had a tense relationship with my mother since I was a child. But this time, the line has been crossed because it's now affecting my son. I'll go into detail. My mother, let's call her Sylvia, 56, raised me and my younger sister, Jane, 26. She ignored my son's medical emergency for brunch with my golden child sister, and now she's sending $10,000 gifts. But my decision shocked her. Because of the trauma she endured, losing a husband and raising her children alone, she has been a bitter woman for as long as I can remember, but people used to ignore it. I have always been a lively child who loves to run in the outdoors and smile at people, but I never experienced the same level of kindness from my mother. My sister was 2 years old when my father passed away, so the Sai used to assist my mother in small ways by looking after Jane, or entertaining her when she was by herself. My mother did occasionally acknowledge me, but that was the only affection I received from her over the years. So I began to act out and turned into the most ungrateful child she had anticipated me to be. By the time I was 13, I had a part-time job, took care of household chores, and even watched Jane exclusively for my mom would return from work and criticize the smallest things, which resulted in arguments nearly daily. I believe Jane was impacted by this abrupt shift in my behavior and attempted to approach me, but I turned her down. Over the following few years, it became clear that Jane had become my mother's favorite child. Her favoritism was so obvious that she didn't attend my high school functions. After high school, I moved to a different city for college as soon as I could because Jane was sick, but that's a story for another time. I didn't keep in touch with my mother because neither of us tried to stay in touch, but I still received casual texts from Jane, who would respond when it felt necessary. A few years into college, I married my then husband and had a son named Jaden. I was still in contact with Jane during all of this, even though we weren't close, and our relationship was only maintained through texts and sporadic phone calls. My mother tried to get in touch with me after learning about Jaden's birth, but I never cared enough to call. I was allergic to 10 foods that were potentially fatal, so we decided to adopt a vegan lifestyle on the doctor's advice. In the meantime, my relationship with my ex-husband had become abusive, so I filed for divorce and returned to my hometown. Jane learned of this and wanted to meet me and Jaden, so I invited her to my new apartment. Jane arrived with my mother, who pretended that everything was fine between us. I found it really strange and wanted to discuss it, but I was also moved by Jaden's happiness to have a new home. Since they were the only people I could call family at this point, I decided to overlook it for the time being. Later, when Jaden was sleeping, we started talking, and I confronted my mother about the no contact policy. Jane interrupted and apologized on her behalf, saying that it was extremely inappropriate of her to not try to get in touch with me. I didn't agree with it, but the way my mother begged for a chance to be a part of her grandson's life, and after seeing how content Jaden was, I made the decision to try our relationship. Over the next few months, everything went well. I found a marketing hybrid job, and my employer was gracious enough to let me work from home because my son was alone. Jane used to visit occasionally because her college was an hour's drive from our hometown. But things between my mother and me weren't good. My job requires me to take care of her grandson almost every weekend, but instead, she took over the house as if I were living there. At first, I thought this was just her way, but her domineering behavior was becoming out of control, so I thought it would be best to ask Jane to step in, because I was certain that I would end up fighting with my mom, which wouldn't be good for Jaden. To see Jane agreed and promised to speak with my mother that day, which gave me some relief. However, the next day, I received a call from my mother, who continued to complain that I should have addressed her directly, like an adult, rather than complaining to my sister. I tried to tell her that it wasn't the appropriate time to talk, but she persisted, so I put her on speakerphone and returned to my work. I realized this after I didn't respond, and she hung up. Later that night, I received a call from Jane, who said that her mother was upset, and even sobbed about the way I handled the call. I made it very clear to Jane that I didn't want to be treated like a child again, and that I wanted Mom to temporarily remove herself from my and Jaden's lives. Jane attempted to persuade me not to limit Mom's time with Jaden, but after a year passed during which Jane graduated from college, and Jaden turned 4, I was able to leave him with reliable babysitters in case of emergencies, a role that Jane primarily played. I did, however, see Mom occasionally, mainly at family gatherings, after she finally agreed and sent me a text message apologizing for her phone misbehavior, or holidays, and everything went fairly smoothly. However, on one occasion, I had to rush to work and asked Jane if she could watch Jaden. She said that she had a job interview so she suggested that his mother could watch him. I was first dubious, but after giving it some thought, I concluded that this was the only practical option. My mother was more than happy to watch Jaden, so I briefed her on his allergies and what to do if something went wrong. I gave her the cheat sheet for Jaden's needs and asked her to call me right away if anything went wrong, but she nodded. And I laughed because my mom abruptly said, "You can trust me with your child." I raised you, after all. My work errand was only a 2 to 3 hour job, which I assumed would be simple enough for my mom, who had just boasted about her ability to raise. Within an hour and a half, I received a call asking me to go to a nearby hospital. I apologized to my supervisors and hurried to the hospital, only to discover that Jaden had experienced an allergic reaction. I was furious with my mother and asked her to wait outside while I picked up Jaden. The doctors informed me that Jaden had consumed some gluten-containing cookies, one of the 10 things he is allergic to, and even though he was safe, but things could have gone horribly wrong. I told the doctor that this wouldn't happen again, and I went home with my mother. Jane had already come to my house, so I asked her to take Jaden to his room and stay with him, and she did. What transpired between my mother and me was a very dramatic argument in which she attempted to blame the accident on Jaden eating the cookie. She wasn't looking, but she quickly acknowledged that she was at fault for not paying attention to me or looking at the cheat sheet. I told her that she could no longer be around Jaden without my supervision, and she began to cry, saying that I was being too harsh and that it was a mistake. However, I refused to back down because it was now a matter of life or death for my child. She left shortly after, and Jane followed her. I later got Jane texted me to say that I was being too harsh, but she quickly backtracked when I told her that she would suffer the same consequences if she stood up for her mother. I then hired Nancy, a kind of permanent babysitter from a company that provided background-checked caregivers. So it's safe to say that I didn't need Jane for Jaden. After that, Jane continued to visit Jaden and me, but her visits decreased significantly after Jane took a job. I still got occasional texts from her about Jaden, but that was the extent of our communication, and I was fine with it because I understood the dynamic. A few months later, I was caught up in another work situation on a Saturday, which also happened to be Jaden's monthly doctor's appointment. So I asked Nancy to take Jaden. Our relationship grew more strained, and we returned to our previous routine of texting rarely about our personal lives. I was about to refuse and remind her of what had happened the last time, but before I could do so, my mom overheard Jane, who didn't realize I was on the call, and began ranting about how she wouldn't babysit Jaden even if she was paid because of dealing with him and his family. I called Jane for assistance because she was at the hospital with her own child. Jane answered, but she said she had a work commitment. Condition was a burden. Jane attempted to stop her, but she continued to blame me for not being a good mother and keeping the responsibility of raising Jaden to myself. I was so fed up with her that I ended the call with Jane and called my mother right away to vent. She answered and apologized, saying that she was meant to have brunch with Jane and that what I heard was just her getting frustrated. I told her that Mom tried to make amends with me, but I hung up as soon as I realized that her apology wasn't genuine. Jane didn't defend her this time, and she apologized, but I ignored her text because she told me she had work when she could have told me the truth anyhow. I chose to take a rain check at work to go with Jaden on his doctor's appointment and chose not to contact my family. From that point on, Jaden kept asking about his grandmother. Although it was difficult to watch him miss my mother, I was able to distract him by focusing on other things. It was his 5th birthday, and we had already selected a school for him to start kindergarten. I sent out a few invitations for his birthday, including Jane, but not when Mother Jane joyfully arrived with a large bag of presents, which, to be honest, looked rather expensive. I asked her not to spend so much at once, especially for a child who might move on to the next toy as soon as he finds one. Jane informed me that the gift wrap box inside the bag belonged to her, and the rest were from Mom. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I asked her to take them. I understood her point of view and began to feel bad about keeping Jaden away from his grandmother when they enjoyed each other's company so much over, what perhaps only I took seriously after Jane's reaction. However, she declined, stating that she didn't want to interfere with my relationship with my mother, and that she thought I should at least take into consideration Mom's gesture for her grandson, which was the least she could do after not being able to meet him. Jaden and I decided to open the gifts after the party, and he naturally chose the large bag from his grandmother. I looked inside and took out the first gift, a plush toy for his school bag. But as I reached in to take out more, I discovered that the remainder of the bag contained several boxes of cookies from a pricey brand made with ingredients I made. The decision to call my mother to discuss this with her. I decided not to show it to Jaden because he has an allergy, and I was upset that my mother was so preoccupied with making a big gesture that she didn't even check to see if what she was sending was appropriate. He threw a fit and eventually took out the cookies, asking me to open a box and give him one. When we couldn't come to an agreement, I called my mother and asked her to inform Jaden that the gift wasn't for him. My mother was prepared for a fight over the phone, expecting me to apologize and thank her for her wonderful gift. When I informed her that her gift was harmful to Jaden's health and asked her to persuade him not to eat it because it was her gift, she became defensive and began to give me examples of how she reared Jane and me. She also said that if I weren't such a weird hippie because I was vegan, which she views as in her audacity, shocked me, but I didn't have time to argue, so I asked her to talk to Jaden about the situation. After some complaining, she told him that the cookies weren't for him and that she would bring his gift tomorrow. Jaden listened, and I thanked her for calming the situation before hanging up. She could go on, but after this I got stuck thinking about what my mom had said about me being to blame for Jaden's health when she was obviously at fault. It caused a lot of childhood trauma. So I called Jane in, the hopes that she would understand and help me work things out. But she told me to let it go because that's just the way mom is. From that point on, I made the decision not to talk to Jane about my issues and to keep our relationship going. Contact limited. I wasn't happy with what had happened and wanted to teach mom a lesson. The following day, when she arrived at my door with another gift for Jaden, I asked her to leave, telling her that she didn't deserve to be in our lives because she wasn't happy with me and my lifestyle enough to risk her grandson's life. She began to talk about how she had raised me through hardships, only for me to take her. In an effort to guilt trip me, she inquired about the gifts she sent and how costly they were. I swiftly went inside, brought the bag of presents back to her, and wrote a check for the gift Jaden had already opened. She assured me there was no need to be petty, but I was determined to cut off all communication with her without any conditions. She left disappointed. I knew it would be difficult to tell Jaden that Grandma would be gone for a while because of her personal plans, and he agreed. I also received a call from Jane, who was furious about Mom having a fit after coming home from my house and becoming ill as a result. She wanted me to apologize and make amends with Mom, but I assured her that's just the way Mom is and that she would be okay soon. I'm okay with Jane calling me insensitively and hanging up, but I do believe that the drama has damaged our relationship and that Jaden may never see his grandmother again. Could I be the a-hole for this update? I appreciate everyone in the comments for understanding my predicament, and I now understand that I wasn't at fault at all. I still regret how things went with Jane, but she is to blame for many of you inquired about my relationship with Jane, and whether it was alright, despite her being treated as a golden child. The truth is that I was old enough to realize that it wasn't my mother's fault, but rather that she was wrong for favoring one child over the other. Jane has always been the middle child, and I won't contact her until she changes her mind and apologizes. She hasn't been problematic or rude, but rather non-confrontational, which is why she asked me to let it go. However, I think it's time she realized that relationships cannot be maintained by being a doormat, which she is experiencing in the form of Mom's unjustified tantrums. Now for the actual update I'm writing. She is an easygoing child who maintains her natural stance, balancing both Mom and me. I assumed everything was fine after a week or so, since I hadn't heard from Jane about my mother. However, knowing my mother, I had a sneaking suspicion that something bad might happen, so I decided to take a brief vacation with Jaden. A few weeks after the incident, before his school started, I received a call from my paternal aunt. I haven't mentioned my relatives yet, because they aren't pertinent to the story, or my throughout my life. The majority of them have supported my mother's treatment of me when I was a child, and the others have ignored it. As a result, I never really tried to keep up a relationship with them, outside of the occasional friendly conversation. This call from my aunt was unexpected, and I assumed something serious must have happened, because when I answered, she told me in detail how my mother was admitted to the hospital, and I couldn't even. When I asked her how she knew, she told me that her mother had called her, and a few of her siblings, to disparage me for leaving her. I didn't want to explain, so I told her it was complicated and to keep out of it. She started calling me derogatorily in rage, but I hung up and blocked her. I'm sure these calls will continue, but I hope that blocking my aunt will send a message to the others. Tomorrow, Jaden and I are heading out on vacation. I'm writing this update 2 weeks after Jaden and I had a great time on our vacation, and it really helped that I avoided technology for a while. When I checked my phone, I had a few missed calls from some relatives, but I decided not to call back. When I got home, I discovered some men accusing me of being a careless daughter, and I realized that Jane was my only option after realizing that my mother was still trying to play the victim and spread a false narrative. I had a few missed calls from her as well, so I decided to call her back, but she didn't answer, so I assumed she was at work. I left her a voicemail asking her to keep an eye on Mom spreading rumors about me and to take this as a warning about the repercussions she would face if our relatives persisted in harassing her. She called me back that same evening and pretended nothing had happened between us. But I wasn't going to entertain that. I asked her to get straight to the point, and she informed me that her mother was essentially pleading with me to speak. At first, I refused, but after much convincing from Jane, I agreed. Talked to Mom, who was ecstatic on the call, and started talking as though nothing had changed. I interrupted her and asked her why she wanted to talk to me. She explained that ever since I told her to avoid Jaden, she had been suffering in silence, laughing at how she disparaged me to everyone, and that she was prepared to agree to any terms I had if it meant she could be involved in Jaden's life. I didn't understand how she vaguely mentioned how attached she had grown to Jaden as a means of re-establishing contact with me. As much as I wanted to feel sorry for her, I couldn't help but remember how she had twice attempted to put my son's life in danger and tried to place the blame on me. I finally refused her demands, and there wasn't much more to say, so I hung up the phone and returned to my life. The days that followed were calm, with fewer unwanted things seemed to be going my way last weekend, when I received an invitation to the wedding of a close childhood friend who used to be my neighbor. Normally, I don't go to such events because I'm busy with work and Jaden, but this time, I went at my friend's insistence. I hadn't thought that Jane might also be invited, so it surprised me to see her at the event. Calls and Mom's attempts to apologize had failed to get through to Jane since then. Jaden was excited to see his grandmother at the reception with her +1, but my mother kept her excitement in check while I was around. I kept Jaden close. I greeted Mom and Jane normally, but as I was ready to go to my designated table, my mom asked if we could talk. I told her that I didn't want to start a fight, and that I thought it would be best not to talk. But I had to agree because Jaden began acting out to be with his grandmother. He proposed that we sit together without any seating charts so that Mom could spend time with him, and I could make sure he was safe. Jaden took charge of Mom and prevented Jaden's outburst from getting worse. I agreed, and the evening went smoothly, with Mom acting composed and Jaden having a good time with her. Jane and I caught up, and Jane apologized for blaming everything on me. Cleared the air. Mom was busy with Jaden, so I didn't get to talk to her much. However, as the night came to an end and we were heading to the parking lot, she stopped me and asked if the evening had gone poorly. I told her it was fine, and she asked if she could rejoin us for a few hours. I told her that I had given her permission to be around Jaden tonight because it was the only sensible option. Reminded her that she had previously put his life in danger and had never accepted responsibility. So even if it made me the villain in my son's eyes, I would never allow her to be near him again. She started crying right away, and Jane tried to comfort her and lead her back to the car. I knew it was best to leave right away, so I hurried to my car with Jaden, who was also upset to see his grandma in this state. My mom tried to comfort Jaden. He was too terrified and clung to me, so I left as people started to swarm around her to find out what was wrong. I called Jane after putting Jaden to bed, and she spoke harshly, telling me to call later. I did. And the following day was Sunday, so after I finished my chores and fed Jaden, I sat him down and told him that he would no longer see his grandma and that he should avoid. I believe he understood because of the previous night's incident, and agreed. Shortly after, I received a call from Jane, who said she couldn't talk last night because her mother became hysterical at the mention of my name. I assured her that everything was fine and asked if she was okay. She said that everything was fine for the time being, but that she was afraid of her mother's behavior might point to a more serious problem. I agreed and expressed my worries that Mom might start bothering us again. She recognized my viewpoint and recommended a restraining order. If Mom didn't get better, I also thought about moving in case she got better and tried something similar again. Update 3. I'm writing this last update after a month because, happily, this problem has been fixed in the most recent update, Jane. She expressed her worry about her mother's behavior, so she prudently had her checked out. The psychiatrist found that she had severe bipolar disorder, and because of her advanced age, the psychiatrist suggested that Jane take her to a private mental health facility for a while to receive better care. Jane discussed this with her mother, who surprisingly understood and accepted the doctor's advice. The facility is located in a different state, so Jane and Mom will be. I knew Jane didn't have the funds to admit her, so I offered to help financially. However, she said her mother was paying for it, so I withdrew my offer. Jane also gave Jaden a message from her mother stating that she would recover quickly and meet him when his mother permitted it. I chose to keep this message private. Jaden, and I will not be relocating for now that Mom will no longer be present. And despite the fact that things have been difficult, I still hope she gets between us.